Some war stories sound fake. Not exaggerated. Fake. Too strange for Hollywood. Too stupid for fiction. But they happened. By October 1944, the USS Tang was the most feared submarine in the Pacific. Under Commander Richard O'Kane, she had hunted Japanese shipping for months, and she was exceptional at it. 33 enemy ships sunk, more than any other American submarine in the entire war. O'Kane wasn't cautious like other commanders. He pressed every attack. He came in close, fired fast, and always found a way through. His crew trusted him completely, and every patrol proved them right. On the night of October 24th, the Tang was working through a Japanese convoy in the Taiwan Strait. Ships were burning. The enemy was in chaos. O'Kane had one torpedo left, the last one on board, and he ordered it fired to finish the job. The torpedo left the tube at 11:55 p.m. For the first 2 seconds, everything looked normal. Then it started to turn. Not sharply, just a slow, wide arc through the dark water. The crew watched the trail of bubbles on the surface as it bent further and further, back toward them. O'Kane ordered full speed, hard turn, everything the Tang had. It wasn't enough. The torpedo completed its arc and hit the Tang's own stern. The explosion tore through the back of the submarine, and she started going down almost immediately. Of the 87 men aboard, most died in the blast or went down with the ship. 9 made it to the surface, O'Kane among them, floating in the darkness, surrounded by burning oil and wreckage from the convoy they had just been attacking. They were pulled from the water at dawn by Japanese sailors, from the very ships the Tang had been sinking minutes before. O'Kane spent the rest of the war as a prisoner. The treatment was brutal, and the men who survived carried it long after the war ended. He was later awarded the Medal of Honor. The investigation found a gyroscope fault in the torpedo's steering, a known defect with the Mark 18 that had been reported before but never fully fixed. The Tang was simply the boat that fired the faulty torpedo last. 33 ships sunk, one of the most feared submarines in the Pacific, and in the end, brought down by its own last weapon. On the morning of August 6, 1945, Tsutomu Yamaguchi was standing in Hiroshima. He was 29 years old, a naval engineer on a business trip, and his assignment was almost finished. He was due to go home in 2 days. At 8:15 in the morning, roughly 3 kilometers from the hypocenter, the first atomic bomb detonated. The flash came first, blinding, instant, total. Then the shockwave, a wall of superheated air that threw him to the ground, ruptured his eardrums, and burned his arms and face severely. Around him, the city was already gone. He survived the initial blast. He spent the night in an air raid shelter, barely able to hear, barely able to see. The next morning, he made a decision. He got on a train and went home. Home was Nagasaki. He arrived on August 8th. His wounds were bandaged but serious. He had been told to rest. On the morning of August 9th, he went to work anyway. He wanted to report what he had witnessed, to explain to his supervisors what the weapon had done, what the city looked like. He was mid-sentence, describing the explosion in Hiroshima, when the room turned white. The second bomb had fallen. The hypocenter was less than 4 kilometers from where he was standing. The same flash, the same shockwave, the same heat. He was knocked off his feet for the second time in 4 days. He survived again. In the weeks that followed, he suffered from radiation sickness, worsening burns, and high fever. He lost his hair. He lost people he loved. The city he had grown up in was destroyed. He was not expected to live. He lived. He worked. He raised a family. For decades, he rarely spoke publicly about what had happened. When he finally did, he spent the rest of his life traveling the world, meeting with leaders, arguing for nuclear disarmament. In 2009, Japan officially recognized him as the only certified survivor of both atomic bombings. He was 93 years old. He died in January 2010. 2 bombs, 2 cities, one man who walked out of both. In November 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Finland. On paper, it wasn't a war. It was a formality. The Red Army had over 450,000 soldiers massed on the Finnish border, with thousands of tanks and aircraft. Finland had around 300,000 men, poorly equipped, almost no armor, a fraction of Soviet firepower. Stalin expected it finished in 2 weeks. Some Soviet officers reportedly packed dress uniforms for the victory parade in Helsinki. At Suomussalmi, 2 full Red Army divisions, roughly 45,000 soldiers, marched through the forests to capture the region and cut the country in half. The Finnish force defending the area numbered around 11,000 men. The Soviets moved in columns along the few roads cutting through the dense forest. They had tanks, artillery, supply trains, and overwhelming numbers. What they didn't have was any understanding of the terrain. The Finnish commanders understood it completely. The Finns moved on skis. They attacked at night in near total silence, in temperatures that fell to -40 degrees Celsius. They didn't try to match Soviet firepower. Instead, they cut the columns into isolated sections, struck at supply lines and rear units, then disappeared back into the trees before a response could be organized. The tactic had a name, motti, from the Finnish word for a cubic meter of firewood. You isolate the enemy into small pockets. Then you let the cold do the work. Cut off from supply lines, Soviet soldiers froze to death by the thousands. Horses died standing. Tank engines seized in the cold. Men who tried to light fires were picked off by Finnish snipers working in the darkness. Finnish snipers became part of the nightmare. The most feared among them was Simo Häyhä, later called the White Death, a symbol of how invisible the Finnish defense could feel in the snow. By January 1940, the 2 Soviet divisions at Suomussalmi had been effectively destroyed. Over 27,000 Soviet soldiers were dead. Finnish losses were approximately 900 men. The wreckage left in the forest looked less like a battlefield and more like an entire army had simply stopped and died. Frozen soldiers beside frozen horses, tanks buried in snowdrifts, equipment abandoned across miles of road. The Soviet Union eventually forced a peace settlement through sheer numbers. Finland survived as an independent nation, but Suomussalmi is still studied in military academies today, a case study in what happens when a massive army fights in terrain it doesn't understand against an enemy that does. The forest won, and it wasn't close. On August 18, 1976, a small United Nations work detail was sent into the Korean demilitarized zone to trim a tree. Not a metaphor, an actual tree, a poplar growing near observation post Willette on the southern side of the DMZ. It had grown large enough to block the line of sight between two UN positions, and it needed to come down. The team had American and South Korean soldiers with axes and pruning tools. A routine job, nothing unusual about it. North Korean soldiers arrived at the site and ordered them to stop. The UN team continued working. What happened next was sudden and brutal. The North Korean soldiers picked up the axes and clubs the UN team had brought for trimming and used them as weapons. The attack lasted minutes. When it was over, 2 American officers were dead, Captain Arthur Boniface and First Lieutenant Mark Barrett. Several others were seriously injured. The killings sent a shockwave through Washington. 3 days later, the United States responded. Operation Paul Bunyan. The plan was simple. Go back and finish cutting down the tree. The execution was anything but. A team of engineers was sent in to complete the job, accompanied by a convoy carrying 800 South Korean Special Forces soldiers in full combat gear. Above the site, B-52 Stratofortresses flew in from Guam, the largest American bombers in existence, visible for miles. F-111 jets and F-4 Phantoms circled overhead. Attack helicopters held position nearby. Aircraft carriers moved into position off the Korean coast. American forces across the entire peninsula were placed on DEFCON 3, the highest state of readiness short of imminent nuclear conflict. The engineers entered the DMZ at dawn. North Korean soldiers appeared on the opposite side of the border and watched. They did not move. The engineers cut the tree down to a stump in 42 minutes. Then, everyone withdrew. North Korea issued no military response. Kim Il-sung sent a message expressing regret, a statement so unusual that analysts debated its meaning for weeks. No shots were fired. The stump remained in place for years afterward, left deliberately as a marker. 1 tree, 2 dead officers. And for a few hours on an August morning, the largest military mobilization on the Korean peninsula since the armistice, all of it aimed at finishing a job that should have taken 20 minutes. In September 1788, the Habsburg Austrian army was camped near the town of Karansebes in present-day Romania, preparing to engage Ottoman forces. Tens of thousands of soldiers, one of the most powerful military forces in Europe. It started with schnapps. A cavalry scouting unit crossed the Timish River ahead of the main camp and ran into a group of traders on the road. The traders had alcohol. The cavalry bought it and started drinking. Infantry units arrived at the crossing shortly after, also wanting a share. The cavalry refused. An argument broke out, punches were thrown, and in the chaos, someone fired a shot. In the darkness, with thousands of soldiers spread across a wide area, that single shot was enough. Infantry soldiers began shouting, "Turci! Turci!" the word for Turks. The cry spread instantly through the nearest units. The cavalry, hearing the shouts and convinced they were under attack, mounted their horses and fled back toward the main camp at full speed. The thunder of hundreds of horses in the dark reached infantry columns who had no idea what was happening, and they assumed the worst. The Ottoman army had broken through. Panic swept the entire camp. Soldiers started firing into the darkness. Officers tried to restore order by shouting, "Halt! Halt!" in German. But the Austrian army drew men from across the empire, and not everyone spoke German. Soldiers who didn't understand heard, "Allah, Allah," and concluded that Ottoman troops were already among them. The chaos lasted through the night. Units fired on each other, men fled in every direction, and by morning, thousands of Austrian soldiers were dead or wounded. Killed not by the enemy, but by darkness, fear, and a chain of misunderstandings that began with a bottle of schnapps and a single gunshot. The Ottoman army arrived 2 days later. They found the field outside Karansebes already covered in Austrian casualties. They encountered almost no resistance. They captured the town and continued their advance. They had not fired a single shot. War does not always look like strategy. Sometimes it is a circle in the water, a white flash over a city, twice, a frozen road in Finland, a tree in the DMZ, or an army firing into its own shadow. If you enjoyed this, like and subscribe to Ghosts of War. It means a lot, and we'll see you next time.